Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our capstone panel, which is a candid discussion with the Commander of Air Combat Command, General Elmo Spain, who just arrived from Langley Air Force Base. So, General Spain, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. I told him we've had a very extensive set of discussions up to this point in time. And that kind of the primary theme today, we kicked off with it, and that's that air power, no surprise to anybody here, is in continued demand from all of our combatant commands. Every one of our mission areas, whether it's long-range strike, whether it's air superiority, whether it's ISR, whether it's EW, you know, the panoply of different missions that the Air Force conducts. And that it is going to continue to be in demand. We're going to talk about each one of those things in a bit of detail. But I thought to kick this off, something that no one is more familiar with this subject than you are, and that's your career to this point in time. You started...
I'm pretty familiar with it.
Yeah, you're right. That's why I say there's no one that knows that better than you do. General Spain started off his career flying F-15s out at Kadena Air Base. But then after that assignment, he spent the majority of his time, or a good portion of it, I didn't count all the years, in Air Combat Command. Over that period of time, we saw continuous demands, but age increase and size of the force decrease. Could you share with us kind of your observations on how those two major elements have changed the dynamic at Air Combat Command over the years that you've spent there?
You bet. Well, one, thank you for having me here. Appreciate the Mitchell Institute for putting on forums like this to talk about important topics in defense and in air power studies in general. And really great to see everyone in the crowd. A lot of good friends, a lot of old friends, a lot of old good friends, good old friends. It's really a pleasure to be here with you and to participate with you. So thanks for that. Most of my career has been in ACC. Every single command I've had has been in ACC, squadron, group, wing, twice, and now as the MAJCOM commander. And so I have a lot of time in Air Combat Command over my career. I do think it's important, though, that we kind of contextualize, you know, the bounds of your question. Because when I started flying Eagles in Kadena in 1997, I was flying 20-year-old Eagles. And we had maintenance challenges, just like we have maintenance challenges today. They rhyme, but they aren't the same, right? And so, I think it's important to know that, you know, the jets were starting to get old when I came into the Air Force, and they continue, you know, as things do. If you have kids, you know that, you know, they grow up, and airplanes get older if you don't buy new airplanes. And so our airplanes have gotten older, and they continue to. And they break in new and novel ways when you have older airframes. They don't continue to wear out in exactly the same ways. But my experience in Okinawa was that we flew a lot. I mean, we talked a little bit about, you know, we haven't yet, but we will, about white space and about ops tempo. My first assignment, I was TDY 1 year of the 2 years that I was there. When I got to Langley right after that was my first assignment. Our ops tempo was very high, even though we did not go to the desert the 2 years that I was in the 27th, but the SPADs did, and then 71st did. And we were on the road about a year and a half of the 3 years I was there 2 years, about a year of the 2 years that I was there as well, but mostly exercises, so a couple weeks at a time. But a lot of the challenges that we had when I got to Langley in my second Eagle assignment are similar to the ones that we're having now in some of the platforms we're having. You know, I know in your time, most of you flew, you know, 4 to 5 to 7 times a week. I don't think I've ever in my career, other than in a surge week, gotten to that level of flying that you saw in the 80s. At the end of the 90s, we were just in a different place. And so I think when we compare and contrast where we were as an Air Force in those eras, it's important to know that we weren't always what it looked like in the 80s. I do think that's important. There was a confluence of events coming out of Vietnam, and the energy that was applied into the Air Force leadership and the lessons that they took from that of coming back out of that war, that helped to galvanize the service to be more prepared and to build readiness in a way that was different than what they experienced. And then that paired with Creech's leadership at the end of the 70s, and then the Reagan buildup, the funding eventually came along with it. And all those things came together in the 80s to give us kind of a golden era of flying where you could fly a lot. And then in the 90s, the Cold War ended, the wall came down. Some of those imperatives to be prepared to fight against an existential threat went away, and the nation was looking for a different vector. And one of the byproducts of that is there was more risk taken in our military enterprise across the board, all the services, but certainly in the Air Force. And that's played out over the next 20 to 30 years of accepting risk in order to try to get to the future. And so that's probably the biggest transition that we've seen is, hey, and frankly, I don't believe it was necessarily a bad risk calculus. I think at the time, the strategic environment told you, hey, we don't have an existential threat, peer adversary, that most folks were concerned with, and so where can I take some risk and still spend the money that I need to on the nation's priorities? And the military is one of those places to take risk. Now, you never know when that circumstance is going to change, and certainly those of us in the military industry and in the profession would say, hey, we want to be careful about this because you never know when the environment changes on us. And that's kind of where we find ourselves now is, hey, the environment's changed. You don't get to bring back the readiness levels that you had at one point immediately. It takes time. And it takes resources if you dig yourself into a hole. And once you're in the hole, you have to climb your way out of it. There's no quick fix. And so I think what we've seen over time is an Air Force that saw where it needed to be and ended up there because we got a confluence of events that allowed us to. We saw an Air Force that was forced to reduce in size and modernize more slowly, which means that the older airplanes that we had were going to get worn out more and more often. And we were not able to modernize as quickly as we'd like. And even when we did modernize, we kind of took some risks in the modernization that didn't put us in exactly the best footing that we could have been from a readiness standpoint. And so all that is coming to a head kind of right now, right? And so I think there is no shortage of awareness of the problem. There's no shortage of energy to resolve some of these problems. There appears to be a willingness to put resources against these problems. All those are good things. But it's going to take some time now. And so to make the long answer longer, there are a lot of differences in what there has been a lot of change over time in my career in Air Combat Command. But there are so many similarities that we know how to deal with the situation that we're in, and we know the answers to get ourselves out of it. We just have to be disciplined about sticking to that path and continuing to grow our way back into a better readiness state, and then and I think we'll be successful at that.
Well, you jumped right into, it's a great segue into my next question, which was going to be focused on readiness. We had a readiness panel this morning, and clearly both the Secretary and the Chief have made readiness their top priority. Could you, again, the folks who are insiders understand why it's important to focus attention on readiness, but for the layman, could you talk a little bit why it's important to spend the attention and why the attention of the leadership, including yourself, is on readiness, particularly as we face a set of challenges that are arguably the greatest that we've experienced since the end of World War II.
You bet. Yeah, this is an easy one for me, and it's been part of my priorities and my focus since I got to Air Combat Command. And the short answer is, for the non-military professional, is if and nobody wants to get into a war less than people in the military, right? We don't want to be in the fight. We're prepared to go. In our service, if we have to go, we're going to win. That's just the mindset that we're going to have. But I'm going to go with the force that I have, whatever that is. Whatever I have in Air Combat Command, when the balloon goes up, is what I'm going to fight with. And if I ignore, or if I degrade, or if I delay the readiness of the force that I have, then when the balloon goes up and we have to fight, I put the United States, period, the United States and our national interests at risk, because I still believe, though, that the one indispensable force is the Air Force. And now we're still, as a department, between the Air Force and the Space Force, the things that we bring to the fight, no one else brings. And if we don't bring them and we're not successful, we lose. That, I believe that in my heart. And so, the short answer is, the reason why we have to focus on readiness is because we might get into a fight. And if we aren't focused on readiness and we get into a fight, we'll be unprepared and we risk losing. Now, I'll also tell you, if we get into a fight, regardless of what state we're in, and if I have to get pulled out of the bullpen and go crank, I got requalified. I know Cobra left, but I got requalified in the Raptors. So if I have to go out there and go fight by myself with my bad back and bad neck and and one Raptor over the you name it sea, I'm going to believe that we're going to win it. Because we're America and we're going to win it. And we have the best allies on the planet, and we have the best partners on the planet, and we have the most credible, qualified warfighters on the planet. And if we get called into a fight, we're going to win. And we're, the nation, when it makes up its mind to do something, we typically do it, and we do it pretty well. My job is to make sure that when called, I've bought down the risk enough that more of our sons and daughters come home after we win. The fact that we're going to win is not in question. How we get to the win is really the work of the general officers and the senior leaders of the Air Force, and it's our job to buy down the risk as much as possible so that we can win quickly and decisively, get out of the current fight, and deter anybody else who's watching from starting another fight. And so every time we execute, every time the Air Force and the Joint Force gets into a scrape or a scrap or an operation, we have to be decisive and we have to be overwhelming in our efficiency and effectiveness so that we can message to other people who may be thinking now might be a good time to change their mind about that and to continue to delay and to reinforce a deterrent posture that keeps us out of the fight in the first place.
Yeah, very good. A bit of a follow-up to that. In the position that you're in, what are some of the trends that you're following to measure effectiveness in reestablishing where you'd like to go?
Yeah, so General Wilsbach, as the previous Air Combat Command commander, started an initiative called the Readiness Informed Metric, and essentially what this is just a reinvigoration of looking at our aircraft and our maintenance statistics at all levels, and everybody working from the same data pool, and every leader at every level paying attention to it and asking direct and pertinent questions about how we're doing in our maintenance statistics. And so there are particular stats that we look at pretty routinely: mission capable rates, daily aircraft availability rates, utilization rates. I also look at experience levels within squadrons, absorption capability, et cetera. These are things that I personally track on all of our fleets inside of Air Combat Command, and we have continued to evolve the process that General Wilsbach built to be able to pay attention to it so that our lowest level commanders know that flying and fixing airplanes is their job. And I want to, if I can, talk a little bit about fly, fix, in order to fight and win if called, right? Flying and fixing is about readiness and deterrence. So that if called, we can fight and win. And I just want, for everybody in this crowd and in the Air Force crowd, when he's talking about those as outcomes, hey, we need to fly and fix in order to fight and win as a service, it doesn't mean that the flyers and the fixers and the fighters are the most important people in the Air Force. It means that it takes the team to do those things in order for the service to be the indispensable service that it needs to. And there are a lot of people on this team that enable flying and fixing. It's not just pilots and aircrew or maintainers. All of our support entities ensure that I can get the right parts, fuel, infrastructure to the flight line in order to be able to get that airplane ready to fly, and then it takes a robust training apparatus to get the aircrew ready to jump into the airplane and then go and fly. There are a lot of folks who are in the intelligence profession and the cyber operations profession that are part of fighting and flying and fixing airplanes, whether that's ISR, whether that's preparing to go into the environment so that we can be successful. I was talking with my weather wing commander this morning. If we are reacting to weather that is detrimental to the operation and first contact is an execution, we've screwed up, right? We have to operationalize weather and our weather professionals so that we are in flow with the weather advantages and disadvantages so that we aren't reactive to a scenario or to an environment that is not conducive to the operations that we want to achieve. And so in terms of trends, those are the things that really I'm looking at. And technology-wise, there are things that are becoming more and more prevalent that that will help us significantly if we can harness them. And that in terms of predictive analytics, the ability to parse, consolidate, and synchronize the data that is available to us now has maybe never been higher at any point in our history, and yet we are still working off of Excel spreadsheets and checklists as opposed to automated tools to help us really refine what is needed to be ready from a maintenance perspective. And so continuing to monitor the trends in the digital space, monitoring those core key metrics that we talk about from a maintenance perspective, and then balancing that against our ability to season, experience, and absorb new pilots as we go.
Very good. One more on the subject of readiness, and with a bit of potential good news. I mean, we've seen recently the President's desire to increase top line in the DOW budget to around $1.5 trillion. And whether it's $1.5 trillion or 1.3 or 1.1, hopefully it's more than what we got. And there'll be a significant chunk of change available. So if you get a significant chunk of change, with respect to readiness, where would you invest it to help in those challenges?
Yeah, well, certainly, 1.5 trillion would be nice. There are a lot of bills that are out there, as you know, probably as well as anybody else. But that would go a long way towards getting after that. One of the areas I've been very focused on is, it'd be great if we got 1.5 trillion. But as you know, it takes a while for money to turn into capability. And in the flying business, that take a while amount of time is measured in years. If I buy $500 billion worth of parts today, if we got all of it, those parts don't start showing up for a year or two. In some cases, 3 or more, depending on which parts we're talking about. So I'll answer your question directly in a second. But until that time, we have to do things to be prepared for those resources to show up. And this is where, we've actually gone back in history and looked at what General Creech did to learn from his readiness rebound in the late 70s and early 80s. It actually started before the money showed up. And so a lot of what we're focusing on is really just a back to basics on, hey, what are the things that we need to be really good at as an enterprise in order to reclaim readiness as quickly as possible? And some of those things don't involve money. They involve behavior, they involve attention, they involve skill sets, they involve partnering. And what are we focused on inside of our wings to enable an operation to be as efficient as possible, as effective as possible, excuse me. And then if resources come on top of that, I can take the most advantage of the resources. And then there's a part, I think the thing that is different from when you were growing up and at the early part of my career is that I don't think we shorted spare parts as much as we have done that in the most recent history back in those days. I think there were older airplanes. I think there was a lot of flying happening, and we went through parts faster, but I think we had the parts. And so that's a different circumstance. And so we have to fix that. That's the main imperative. And this is to answer your question. The first dollar I would spend would be on spare parts. That's in the sustainment enterprise. So spares, your deployed spares packages, your support equipment, those things that enable readiness at home and on the road have to be shorn up because we kind of all, we corporately bought into kind of the Walmart model in the 90s and 2000s of, hey, I'm going to buy X amount, and when I use one, I'm going to put one back on the shelf, but I'm not going to have any extra. It's just going to be a completely efficient parts enterprise, which we know carries risk along that, right? There's delays in delivery, there's perturbations in the production of said equipment, and if the supplier goes bad and you only have one, you run into problems and delays, and we've realized a lot of those risks at different times, but that's what we're seeing now. And so, so the first thing we have to do is we have to refill the stock of spare parts and support equipment. And then we have to get, more effective at getting things through depot, repair lines and depot modification lines. The next thing I would spend money on is our people, and ensuring that I have the right number and type and experience level of our maintainers, of our flyers, of our operational support and combat service support and combat support personnel, to make sure that when called, again, we have the right number of folks to go and not just operate at a daily flying rate, but operate at a surge and sustained flying rate that we need for conflict, not just for day-to-day operations. And so that's the first two. If I had more dollars, I go after the training enterprise and ensure we continue to evolve our training ranges and apparatus. And then finally the infrastructure bills, which are pretty significant, tackle some of those sustainment of our infrastructure challenges that we have now a little bit more quickly, and the combination of all those brings us to a holistic capability, which is what we're after.
Very good. One of the things that you missed was a discussion at the AI panel that what we might be able to see in the future to resolve some of the maintenance personnel deficiencies is robots to replace maintainers.
Yeah,
but,
okay.
we'll leave
Let's
that
see.
for the art of the possible. Now, I got to Kadena about 18 years before you did. 1979, initial cadre F-15s. That was my second assignment. And we are flying, by the way, we had about 20 hours on those jets when they showed up. So a very different time frame, and we flew a lot. But one of the things that's different today that is a big part of the readiness equation is the fidelity of the simulators that we have today. Could you talk a little bit about how systems like the Joint Simulation Environment are affecting the readiness equation?
Yeah, you bet. And it's a great question. And it's an age-old question, I think, in that, and we end up talking in circles around ourselves on this topic. So we got to start by saying, simulators don't replace flying, right? Can we all say that? Yeah, simulators don't replace flying. Let's just get that out on the table. But they do augment training, and we'll talk a little bit about proficiency versus currency. And I think that in the 80s and 90s, based on the complexity of the missions and of the mission areas, who was fighting with you and who you intended to fight alongside, flying hours and sorties was a pretty good surrogate for proficiency, right? When I go out and fly, most of the time I'm going to be doing the things that I'm going to do in combat to a level that's representative of what I might see. And therefore, every time I go and do that, that's a pretty high-end counter. And the more I'm doing that, the better I'm getting at all of those things. Certainly fog and friction award notwithstanding, and hence red flag and other venues like that. But in the environment we live in now, everything is integrated. It's got to be for success on the Air Force side, with Space Force, with our joint partners. The threat is much more complicated. The ranges are significant. Our ability to replicate the threat live fly is ever challenged by the rapidity with which these threats are evolving, right? And if you want to simulate a threat, you actually have to know way more about the threat in the digital world than you do if you're just trying to emulate it when you're flying and representing a threat. And so there are some challenges there, but there are going to be some things, and there already are some things today that we can only do in the sim right now. We can only do them in the joint synthetic simulation environment in F-35. And as a F-22 guy, when we would go to our high-end simulator, we all believe that was the best training we got, period, dot. No matter where we flew, it was the best training. And eventually we convinced ourselves, hey, if that's the best training, maybe that should count for proficiency of our pilots, which we eventually did, which was a good thing. Can't be everything, but it's a good thing. The F-35 community is experiencing that with JSC right now. When they go there and fly in the JSC, they get the best training that they can get on the planet right now. Does not replace flying, right? They have to still be able to do those things while flying. There's nothing that replaces the actual ability to hit the ground, the actual ability to hit your wingman, the actual ability to get your brain and inner ear turned upside down in the weather. You have to go do all of those things tactically that you want to, or that you can only emulate in the sim, live fly. And so our kind of old school, the sim is just for EPs and admin and instruments, to, hey, the sim is we would call it, you go hit a bucket of balls. And this is, if I can go on a quick aside, so the sims that I inherited from him at Kadena, and I see some Kadena alumni in the crowd, right? There were no visuals in those sims. It was like our original computers or Commodores. It was a green screen. There were no vids. You could only emulate a night scenario or do EPs and tactical intercepts. And I will never forget. And I see Rico over there. It might have been him as a CFI, but I think it was probably Yard Corcoran. To simulate a bird strike in the sim, they would throw a checklist at the canopy, and it would hit the canopy, and that you'd go, what the heck is that? And then they go bird strike, tower calls, you might have had a bird strike. Oh, okay. But there wasn't anything you could see in it. And so the sims that we have in our F-15s, our F-22s, our F-16s are actually, compared to that, are very, very good, like very good. But they don't emulate the threats very well as they could. But they do allow you to go some v many without paying for 20 different platforms to be out there as Red Air. You can have a SAM IADS picture that represents a real place in the world exactly, without having to set up an IADS over the East Coast, over the water, and try to emulate that. Those are things that we can't afford to do. As we get to F-47, right? F-47 and B-21 are incredible platforms. They're going to be unbelievably lethal. We can't possibly pay for enough adversary air or scenario-based threats to stress the pilot in that weapon system live fly. We won't be able to do it. Oh, by the way, we don't want everybody watching those tactics in the areas where they can be seen. And as we go from 20 to 30,000 to 40,000 to 50,000 satellites that are all looking for the same things, those signatures matter a lot. And so I have to be able to go to a place where I can execute high-end tactics in a stressing scenario with a relevant threat, and all the bells and whistles that come along with the platform, and that place is going to be in the sim. The next step, and one that I'm very interested in, is how do I get the synthetic environment into the cockpit? And we've talked about this for a long time, live, virtual, and constructive, right? But the real holy grail is constructive and virtual connected to the OFP, so that when I'm working my hands-on stick and throttle actuations and I'm running a radar against a constructive track, I can execute my tactics perfectly from within my cockpit, and all of this is constructive, and maybe I have a couple of live players in the middle of that. So that when you're watching me fly out over the East Coast from a satellite, you only see one airplane, right? You don't see the 1V1000. You just see one airplane trundling along. You don't have any idea what they're doing. When I watch a 4V8 or a 8V25 on the Nellis ranges, you can kind of see what's going on, and you can make some inferences about what the tactics are. So we have to be able to get from where we are now, which is kind of sims and flying, to a merge of those two things. And again, we've been trying to do this for a while. This is not easy business, but we're getting closer, and we're getting closer to having the technology and the networks and the bandwidth to be able to do some of this. Now we have to be able to tie it to the operational flight programs and the jet programming so that it's seamless to the pilot, so it's not negative training.
Very good. Let's switch gears a little bit. As we move more and more into the collective information age, electromagnetic spectrum operations are gaining the potential to achieve desired outcomes or effects that are not necessarily lethal, but extraordinarily valuable. Platforms like the EA-37B, and certainly along with the improved apertures with 5th gen and shortly 6th gen aircraft. Could you talk a little bit about this evolution and how it changes the way you think about accomplishing your mission objectives across the spectrum of roles that air power has?
You bet. When I talk about integration, this is one of the key elements of integration that I'm talking about. We have to have layered effects across multiple domains in order to buy down the risk of winning. So if we're going to win, and we're going to win, what are the things that I can throw at the problem that increase my chances of winning and buy down the risk to our forces while increasing risk to the adversary forces? And the electromagnetic spectrum and electronic warfare is one of those ways that we can buy down risk to our forces, increase risk to their forces, and achieve effects faster and more effectively. The EA-37 is the successor to the EC-130, and it's light years ahead of the capability that we saw on the EC-130. And the EC-130 was pretty good. And so we need to continue to refine our ability to execute electronic warfare from up close, from a distance, completely aligned and synchronized to the kinetic effects that we want to achieve. And we've got to be able to harness this in synchronicity with everything else that we're trying to do. One of the challenges that General Deptula mentioned is the trust factor, right? In the electromagnetic spectrum and in cyberspace, frankly, you don't have a big smoke cloud, because the bomb that goes off is a non-kinetic bomb, but you might get the effect that you need, but you just can't see it very easily. And it might happen in a little bit different way than you thought. But we have to consider non-kinetic fires as fires. And the sooner we just treat it like fires, then everything kind of gets simplified. And now I know how to talk about it. I know how to ingest it. I know how to bring it into a target prioritization list. I know how to prioritize it within the component structure inside of a combatant command. And I know how to do battle damage assessment, or at least attempt to do it so that I can really be clear about when the objective has been achieved. And part of that is, we've built up this huge apparatus of how we evaluate weapons. We don't have the same apparatus for how we evaluate EA and how we evaluate cyber effects. We know that we need that, and we're trying to continue to evolve those capabilities so that we can build trust in those systems, so that when you turn something on, you know what to expect on the back end of that, and the people who are counting on the effect occurring have a signal that tells them, yes, that effect was applied, and the outcome that we wanted has been achieved. Therefore, the risk is down. You're cleared to go in with the rest of your forces now. Or you can expect to execute a certain type of tactic because you have a lower risk profile. So all of those things are unbelievably important. And rolling into that, so that becomes our enabler. You're an electronic warfare enabler in the electromagnetic spectrum. You have your electronic warfare kind of self-protect options on your 5th gen and 4th gen to a degree in a localized sense. And when you get to 6th gen, how do I network those effects through 6th gen capabilities in order to take advantage of our most exquisite things, getting into the most contested areas when the nation calls on us to get there, survive, execute perfectly, and achieve the effect that is intended.
Yeah, very good. As you're talking, I'm thinking back, 35 years ago, Desert Storm, and, coming out of there, one of my lessons, okay, we got to move away from simply destruction-based analysis and move to effects-based analysis. And here we are 35 years later and still wrestling with that challenge. But it's getting more real for all the reasons you talked about. Cyber's a reality. What we can do with EA is a reality. ACC is in the middle of a massive modernization reset. The 5th gen portion of the inventory is growing every year. How is that? You've talked a little bit about this in the context of SIMS, but how is that changing traditional concepts of operations that your pilots are now thinking about at a much greater scale?
Yeah, maybe I'll hit the second part of that first. So, we're approaching 500 F-35s in the Air Force inventory. We're not quite there yet, but that's a lot. A lot more than a lot of other weapon systems that we've got. And the way that you train in an F-35 is different than the way that you trained in an F-16 and different than the way that you trained in an A-10 or a Strike Eagle. And some of the skill sets, the core skill sets, the building blocks are just different. The necessary skills are different, based on how we fly our formations, what's expected of a new wingman. We experienced this in the Raptor, and as an F-15 guy, people ask me all the time, hey, what's your favorite plane? Which one do you prefer? And of course, if I'm just going to go flying, I'll jump in an Eagle all day. It's like old pair of jeans, everything's in the right spot. My, throttles are in exactly the right place. The stick's actually in the right place. Yeah, big cockpit. I can put my arms up on the thing. Bubble canopy, right? It's just comfortable. And it was great to fly, but it was hard to be proficient in that airplane. Like, you had to be very disciplined to execute with that airplane. As a part of a 4-ship, as a part of a team. And if one of those 4 didn't do their job, the whole 4-ship lost. Like, at any point in an intercept or in a mission, if one person in that 4-ship didn't do their job, the train would start coming off the tracks, and you could go back to the root cause and figure out where that happened. But once that started, it was really hard to recover that. All the systems were disaggregated. It was all put together in your nugget, and you had to figure out what was going on. For a while, as a 4-ship, eventually we got scopes where you could see what other people were doing, which helped, and data links that helped quite a bit, which evolved our tactics as well. But everything was still really manual. And so you had to be very soldierly and deliberate about everything that you did to be good. So what's my favorite plane to fly? The plane I would take into war 100 times out of 100 between those two is the F-22. I'd take the Raptor any day because you're infinitely more survivable, number one, right? We kind of are getting back to this, but in the old days, we'd ran our tactics knowing we were being shot at. Like, you knew you were going to get shot at. You were hoping you could shoot first, but then you ran your tactics to survive against the initial shots, to come back around and take additional shots and clean up everybody else. We kind of gotten away from that with stealth, right? We've kind of forgotten what it's like to be shot at long range, where our teams are experiencing that again, where, hey, these ranges are real, and the tactics, you don't have sanctuary. In early days in the Raptor, you had complete sanctuary. I was not targeted at all during those intercepts. So you had this sense of real impunity that you could operate with. But also, the jet did so many things for me that I didn't need to be really great at putting all that together, because it was all right there on the scope. The airplane did a lot of the work for me in building the picture, in assessing where threats were, and in allocating targets. Now the choice became not if I can shoot, am I shooting the right person? It's when should I shoot? Because I can shoot everybody right now. Like, at any point, I could shoot everybody. But should I shoot everybody? Right? That's the question. I don't know. As a young wingman, you're like, heck yeah, I'm shooting everybody, because I see them all. They're right there. And you're like, okay, we're 3 minutes into a 30-minute vol. You're out of weapons, so go back to the cap, right? And just hang out and try not to suck back there. But so what do I do became the question, not what is going on. In the old days, hey, what's going on? Then I can decide what to do. Well, now I know what's going on, so what to do becomes the key question. And typically we were teaching people to do that as four-ship flight leads, or mission commanders in some cases in the Eagle, and in our fourth-gen platforms. And our wingmen are having to make those decisions in the Raptor and in the F-35, because they're off. The tactics are different. They're having to make individual intercept decisions. When do I shoot my limited weapons? Because if I run out and we have to work our way back in a defensive counter-air scenario where I'm protecting something, and part of the lane has already used up all their weapons, I no longer have good coverage anymore. And so the implications 30 minutes from now play out based on your decisions at the very beginning. And if you aren't thinking through all of that, and you haven't kind of measured, hey, whose weapons should I use here? That becomes the real trick in fifth-gen tactics. And in sixth-gen, it's going to be even more of the same. Hey, I'm going to have total awareness. I'm going to have impunity again. What should I be doing, not just what can I do, is going to be the key question. Your first part of that was about modernization. We are going through a significant period of mods to a good chunk of our fighter fleet. Some of those mods we absolutely, some of these decisions were made at a time where it made sense to try to go as fast as we can to get as many of these mods done as possible, and accept the risk to get to the end state of a more lethal force on the back end. Some of those assumptions didn't play out exactly as anticipated, and so one of the things that we're doing with the mods is actually reevaluating, hey, how aggressively do we want to continue going after these mods right now? When is the modification going to deliver? And is that timeline, if we slow it down a little bit to try to, again, going back to the readiness discussion, because every time we're bringing an airplane down to modify it, it's not flying on the line. And that's one more airplane I cannot use to build readiness. So we're being very deliberate about each modification that we're going to make, how long it takes to do the individual mod, how long does it take to do the fleet-wide mod, and what compromises can we make in there to go fast enough to get the capability on the back end, but without degrading current readiness to the degree that we're seeing in some of the communities that we have.
Bit of a follow-on, great example, by the way, in the context of the difference between the way it used to be and what people are thinking about when they go to fifth gen. Now, as allies get more and more F-35s into their inventories, how does that change the equation?
Yeah, so I was the 589 in USAF for a couple of years, the plans, programs, and requirements and analysis director. And one of my talking points when I was talking to outside audiences about F-35s in Europe was, hey, the U.S. is going to have 54 F-35s in Europe, and by the early 30s, Europe is going to have 600 total F-35s. And so right now it seems like, hey, the U.S. is leading the pack and leading the charge because we were pretty early with F-35s in Europe, but even now we're outstripped by the European allies and partners with numbers. And General Hines in Europe, the USAF Africa commander, is doing a great job of interoperability with our allies and partners in Europe from an F-35 consortium perspective. So we have done exchanges where U.S. pilots and allied pilots are flying each other's airplanes. We've done cross-servicing in Europe of aircraft at different bases around Europe. These are all things we used to do in Europe pretty routinely. Again, back in the 70s and in the 80s, we just have to relearn how to do them with the 5th-gen platform that has really sensitive equipment that we all want to protect. And so getting ourselves to a place where we trust one another sufficiently to say, hey, we all want to do this. I want to be able to land at any base in Europe with my F-35, and if I need a part and they have the part, I want to be able to use that part and pay them back for it, and the system should just do it. I want to be able to interoperate with them in any airspace inside of Europe when we're flying together. I want them to be able to do the same things. I think what we're seeing is we're kind of reaching a critical mass with allies in the F-35 program that's going to reap some very serious benefits for us. In the early days where we were thinking, okay, we're the only 5th-gen game in town, so we need to be everywhere. Well, no, not exactly. When you have 600 F-35s in Europe, that's a pretty credible Air Force. It allows the U.S. Air Force to continue to do other things around the world in accordance with the nation's interests. And same for the Pacific. As we have F-35s in the Pacific, in some of our really key partnerships and allies. And the more we have capability, and I'm a huge fan of our allies and partners that we know are going to fight with us alongside us. I want them to have as high a game as possible, right? For the same exact reasons that I talked about us winning fast and buying down risk of winning fast. If they're as credible as we are, or as capable as we are, then we win faster when they're in it with us. If they're not, we just don't. And so we've got to continue to fight to not convince ourselves that that's too high risk from a technology standpoint, because we won't care when the war starts. We'll just want them to be as good as we are and along a common line with us.
So how are we doing in sharing mission data files?
We're getting there.
Okay.
I know it's an issue. It is an issue. And part of
all the reasons that you just said.
That's right. But honestly, I think the issue now is more that we set up this structure in the F-35, unlike any other program in history, where the agreements that we signed up to 15 years ago from a program office perspective are actually the things that are holding us back from doing certain things. And it requires, it's not exactly like NATO where it's an agreement at 32, but it requires a lot of yeses and a lot of consensus in order to change things. And so we've got to continue to chip away at that to enable the right things to occur when we know they're the right things.
Well, good. This one's kind of a softball, and I think it's kind of obvious, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway, and that's, did Israelis' F-35 operations over Iran suggest any important lessons learned about the value of having 5th gen?
Yeah, every now and then we get into this discussion about whether, it's stealth, it's not stealth, does stealth still matter, and then we have an event like, the attack against Israel and then the attack from Israel to Iran and operations like we see in South America, where we're reminded that, stealth does still matter. And not just stealth, but the sensing capability from that platform, it's just a vacuum. And paired with an exquisite intelligence collection apparatus anyway, right? So a lot of, what I think the Israelis would tell you, is also a key differentiator for them is their exquisite knowledge of the threat. And And then you have a system that both not only augments that knowledge, but reaffirms and reinforces what you may believe or not believe. Hey, I think this is what's going on in the battle space. I have a signals, vacuum that I can suck up all of this information. I just confirmed what I thought was true to be true. Let's go, right? Just having that amount of synchronicity between what you think is happening and what is actually happening is huge. And we saw that play out in their very effective attacks and in them enabling our ability to go in and take out the nuclear plants.
Very good. Now, I can think of no better case for air superiority than comparing what Israel did over Iran versus what's going on between Ukraine and Russia and what they're enduring every single day of the conflict. And I think it's pretty clear what set of conditions are preferred. You mind giving us your observations on that comparison?
You bet. We've talked about this many different times, and I completely agree with you on this. This is the perfect, whenever, much like the discussion about stealth, and before I answer this one, stealth isn't invisibility, and so it has to be paired and layered, just like we talked about with other capabilities. And it's not an or thing. We've got to start thinking in terms of and. Stealth plus EW plus layered effects gets you a much higher capability than just stealth on its own. Okay, fast forward to Ukraine and Russia versus Israel and Iran. One side has air superiority established, neither side has air superiority established. We're coming up on 4 years of a Russian invasion inside Ukraine. Are they achieving some of their objectives? Yes, at significant cost to their population, both sides. Is Ukraine putting up a hell of a fight? Absolutely, with a lot of help, but absolutely. And you also can see, hey, this is what it looks like to be in an existential fight, and why you want to win it quickly against someone who may outnumber you and out-technology you. Just sheer will keeps you in the fight in this case, again, with some help. But the conditions there, without air superiority, this is what a war looks like. You have to get in much closer. It's much more devastating from a human capital perspective and an infrastructure perspective, right? They're constantly taking out electrical infrastructure and utilities and just cities and towns and schools and buildings that have to be built back up at some point if you want to establish some normalcy inside your country. If you don't have air superiority, this is what the fight looks like. There's always next in the discussion on Ukraine is usually about drones and the effectiveness of drones, right? Well, as effective as they've been, tactically, in instances, yes, very effective. Hey, I'm able to send 1,000 drones into Ukraine every other week. That's a gross exaggeration, but and vice versa. They're able to build 1 million drones. The lines of the fight have not changed that much. The reasons why the drones are effective is because they're close-range drones for the most part, and the ground formations are close to one another. If the ground formations were under attack by air formations in any significant way, you wouldn't be able to have the same effect with the drones, because the ground formations would have to be much further back to be in a sanctuary space. And so it all kind of comes together, right? You can look at the technology, and again, going back to and versus or, you can look at the technology and you go, man, we need to get that technology. Yes, we do, absolutely. And I need to have air superiority. It's not that technology gets me air superiority. It does not. It does not. And we have seen that play out over 4 years inside of Ukraine. And the exact opposite, the people who are producing most of the drones on the Russian side just got waylaid by the Israelis. They have all the same drones, right? And we saw them use some of them, not to the same effect. And certainly it wasn't at the same pitched level as we've seen inside of Ukraine, but it didn't deny air superiority in that case. It didn't establish air superiority or establish a war-winning posture for the Iranians, even though they have hundreds of thousands of those things inside of their country. So it is an and. If we've got it, it's going to help. But it is not going to be the thing that's going to be decisive if you cannot establish air superiority.
Yeah, great point. What I like to tell people is, you know, what people call drones, quadcopters with hand grenades, are essentially PGMs that infantry folks have access to. And what they've really affected is the nature of ground combat, infantry and armor operations. In 4 years of continuous combat with the Russians launching hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, not one Ukrainian air base has been put out of action. Not one. Air bases are hard to kill. You know, they might have been shut down for a couple hours, but they're back into operation very quickly thereafter. That could be a discussion item for another day. But I want to get to, before we wrap up here, real quickly on air and space operations. We're increasingly going to see combined air and space operations where airmen and guardians work together to achieve a unified effect, whether it's electronic attack, battle management, ISR, whatever. How are we training with airmen and guardians to make sure that we're optimized to achieve the desired effects or outcomes that we want to see happen?
You bet. Well, we are blessed with a long history with the Space Force of training together, and we really just need to continue to do that in all the forums that we have. And so there is no war without a space component, you know, to the war. When we're training at the high end, if we don't have a space element to that, then we're making mistakes. And so in all of our high-end exercises, Air Force service-wise and joint-wise, we have to play straight up the space capability, and we have to, just like we talked about in the EMSO discussion, we have to have them integrated and synchronized to the degree that we know exactly the effect that they're after, what they can achieve, when they're going to achieve it, what disruptions they're going to have from a, you know, it's not going to always be a K kill. It may just be a mission kill in some of these spaces on the non-kinetic side. And oh, by the way, they enable nearly everything that we want to do from a precision standpoint. And if we're going to have a long-range kill chain, which we want and we want to degrade on the adversary side, it all happens through space. And so we've got to ensure that you know, we are training just as hard with the Space Force on how to execute these fights together as they are on their own and as we are on our own.
Very good. We're running to the end of our time, but I wanted to give you like a quick minute or whatever to speak to your objectives and goals for ACC to kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, you bet. Well, again, thanks for the time, Zaytar. I appreciate it. It's always great to be here with you and to be a part of the discussion with the teammates that you have here. So my priorities in Air Combat Command, I say I have one priority, 3 focus areas, and then a foundation. So the priority is readiness and sustainment of our current fleet. That's period dot. We've coming in from the 3, I was in the front row of a lot of the outcomes of decisions that were made well before our time for good reasons, but of the risk taken to our current force. And back to my earlier point about which force we're going to fight with, right? If we go fight, it's with what we have today. That force has to be ready, and I'm unwilling to take more risk in that force, and in fact, we need to grow it back. So that's really my only priority. The rest are focus areas. Focus area 1, adapt to the strategic environment. What that means is there is no sanctuary any longer. Our bases are going to be under attack. We have to defend them, and I have to be able to move and maneuver within contact, whether that's from a rocket force or from a long-range fires force of some other type. I have to be able to be survivable and disperse in that environment. I have to be able to C2 in that environment. From both hubs, you know, if you think of C2 from an aggregated or disaggregated standpoint, I I may need to create nodes to C2 just as much as I need to create nodes to ACE to do agile combat employment in order to create pockets of command and control and connectivity to maneuver the force while remaining in contact. We cognitively have to train our airmen who are going to be on the ground receiving fire that you still have to generate air power in that environment while things are blowing up and while people are dying all around you. You have to put the weapon on the airplane that just landed. You have to do it in 3 minutes, and that plane has to get back off the ground and get back into the fight while all this is happening. We don't like to talk about it, but that could be in a chem environment, it could be in a biological environment, it could be in a nuclear environment. So we have to be able to do that as well, right? These are skills that we have had in the past. We know how to do this. We just have to get back to the basics on some of these things. Second focus area, bringing the future forward. I believe I have a role in bringing the future faster a little bit, but really my main role is when the new capability comes to Air Combat Command, I have to be able to catch it, absorb it, and make it an operational capability very quickly. If we're delayed for any reason, I don't have a capability and it doesn't do any good. So our .mil PF, how we're organized, how we're training, what our sim architectures look like, are the people prepared to receive it? Is the infrastructure in place to support the thing that we're talking about at the base? Is there a MILCON? Is there not MILCON? How are we absorbing the new capabilities so that when it hits the street, it's operational and effective as soon as possible? And then empowered leadership is my third focus area. I want to push down authority to the lowest possible accountable level of expertise, right? I don't just want to push down authority. I want to push down authority to the right person who needs it at the right time and who can own the risk of using it. And that's different than where we've been for the last 30 years, 20 to 30 years, right? We've pulled a lot of that stuff up. We have to have leaders that are comfortable taking risk without looking over their shoulder. If we want them to do that, they have to exercise that. And so I need to push down those authorities and hold them to the decisions that they make and mentor, teach, coach through that. They're going to make mistakes. They can't be fired every time somebody makes a mistake. So they got to try things. They got to fail. They got to learn from it. They got to fess up that it was on their watch and they did it and they're going to get better. And then we got to move on and try it again and go faster. And then the last, kind of foundational thing is just warfighting excellence. This is all about our ability to take what we have, all the things that I talked about. I would love to have 2 to 4 years, sanctuary to make all that stuff happen, right? And I'm pretty sure with sanctuary, they would all happen, 100%. But we don't have sanctuary. We have to execute to the National Defense Strategy priorities every day. We have rotational forces that leave every day, which means we don't have sanctuary. We have to continue executing while we're trying to get better. And so I don't know how much time we've got. And when I talk about warfighting excellence, it's about taking accountability for those things within your control, influencing uphill so that if there is an opportunity to do something better with resources, that we make the case for that. But don't expect it. You are operating without a net and without a rope. And we have to get better anyway. So I've got 24 hours today to get a little bit better so I can be more ready tomorrow. What are you doing with your 24 hours? And if I stack those day after day after day, week after week, month after month, a year from now, we're going to be better, whether I get any resources or not. And that's the point that I'm making to our team is, hey, we may get resources, we may not, but I can't have us sitting around waiting for that to happen. You have to get better today regardless of what you have, and tomorrow you'll be a little bit more ready, and if the fight happens tomorrow, you'll look yourself in the mirror and go, yep, I used my 24 hours well, and I'm ready to go. Let's hit the road.
Well, very good. Thanks very much for a very insightful set of remarks. And we wish you all the best in accomplishing those objectives. And may the Air Force receive about $125 to $150 billion more in the 27 budget. So please join me in thanking General Spain for being here.
Thanks.
Okay, real quick, ladies and gentlemen.